Something is happening in Cleveland right now, and I'm not just throwing that out there to grab your attention. I genuinely mean it. When people inside an NFL building, people who know better, people who understand exactly what's at stake when they talk, start whispering to reporters, when the wall of silence that every front office spends enormous energy maintaining suddenly develops fractures, that's not a coincidence. That's not a leak. That's pressure finding the only exit it can. And what's seeping out of Berea right now is pointing to something I haven't seen from this franchise in a long time. A real, genuine, unresolved power struggle between the man coaching the team and the man who owns it. A head coach planting his flag, an owner pushing back with everything he has, and a young quarterback sitting in the middle of all of it, doing exactly what he's been doing since the moment he walked into that building. Putting his head down, doing the work, rising. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening, because I've gone through every piece of reporting, every sourced claim, every carefully worded implication coming out of that building, and I want to give you the honest version, not the hot take, not the outrage bait, the actual story with all its layers and contradictions and human weight. Todd Monken has made his decision. That's where this starts, and in a lot of ways, that's where the entire drama of this offseason begins. The reporting isn't describing a lean. It isn't describing a tentative frontrunner status subject to revision once training camp opens and competition plays out on the field. What the reporting is describing, and the specificity of what's coming out of Cleveland, is the kind of specificity that only exists when people with real knowledge are doing the talking. Is a head coach who has looked at his quarterback room, made his professional evaluation, and concluded that Shedeur Sanders is his guy. Full stop. Not conditionally, not pending further review. His quarterback, the player he intends to design his offense around, invest his offseason preparation into, and send out onto the field when the games that actually count begin. Think about what that kind of commitment means in the context of an NFL offseason. Coaching staffs are professionally trained to keep their language vague and their options deliberately open. They talk about competitions, about earning starting jobs, about the process unfolding organically. That language isn't dishonesty, it's organizational management. It protects relationships. It keeps every player engaged and motivated. When a head coach abandons that careful hedging and commits with apparent finality to a player in April, it tells you the internal evaluation reached a level of clarity that the usual diplomatic language can no longer cover. Monken saw something in what he has, weighed it against what he doesn't have, and made a call. And from everything the reporting suggests, he's standing behind it. To understand why that call landed where it did, you have to understand what the conversation about Deshaun Watson actually sounds like behind those closed doors, because there is a massive gap between how the Browns have talked about Watson publicly and what the people inside that building apparently believe privately. Publicly, the organization has been careful, measured, appropriately supportive. They've avoided closing doors, avoided language that diminishes Watson's professional standing, avoided anything that might ignite a public confrontation before they were ready for one. That's standard. That's how organizations manage complicated internal situations involving significant financial and human stakes. I get it. But what the sourced reporting is describing internally is something far darker than careful public management. The concern about Watson's physical condition isn't being framed by the coaching staff as ordinary injury risk, the kind of baseline physical uncertainty that exists around every NFL quarterback who's taken significant hits over a long career. What's being described is something more specific and frankly more alarming than that. The coaches are apparently worried that Watson could get seriously hurt not over the course of a full season, not over weeks of accumulated contact and physical wear, but within the opening minutes of a game he starts, before the offense has even had a chance to run meaningful plays, before the game plan has had a single opportunity to be executed. I want you to sit with that for a second, because when I think about what it actually means for a coaching staff, it changes everything. It doesn't just change depth chart decisions, it changes the entire foundation of how you build a game week. How do you design a play-calling structure around a quarterback when your own internal medical assessment tells you that structure might not survive the first possession? How do you spend 40 hours installing a specific game plan, the specific route combinations, the motion packages, the third down adjustments built around this specific player's processing and arm angles, when you genuinely don't know if that player will be on the field for possession number 2? You can't. You simply cannot build a functional professional football team around a quarterback whose availability you can't project beyond the opening drive of a game. When a coaching staff reaches that level of internal concern, the practical logic of the situation makes the decision for you long before anyone has to say it out loud. Shedeur Sanders, from that specific framework, stops being an unproven rookie competing for a starting role and starts being the only rational answer to an impossible question. Because whatever developmental work remains ahead of him, And there is real work ahead. Let's not pretend otherwise. The jump from college football to professional football is legitimately steep, and it requires time and mistakes and growth. He offers the one thing Watson currently cannot offer with any confidence, the basic guarantee that he'll be standing on the field when the snap count starts. You can develop a healthy quarterback. You can install a system around him, give him first-team reps across an entire offseason, let him build real rhythm with his receivers and real familiarity with protection schemes and real comfort with the decision-making demands the professional game places on every young passer. That developmental infrastructure, built properly and consistently from day one, is how quarterbacks actually become what their talent suggests they can be. None of that is possible when the baseline physical certainty doesn't exist. That's Monken's logic. And honestly, I think it's airtight. It's not an emotional decision. It's not a recency bias response to a rough stretch of Watson results. It's a coach looking at the specific reality in front of him and making the only call that gives his offense a foundation to build on. But here's where the story stops being a coaching evaluation story and becomes something with real organizational drama. Jimmy Haslam is pushing back, hard, from all accounts. The owner of the Cleveland Browns has not quietly accepted the direction his head coach is pointing. He still wants Watson to get another chance. He still believes, or at minimum still wants to believe, that the investment the organization made deserves another opportunity to generate the returns it was supposed to generate. And that collision between what Haslam wants and what Monken has decided is the actual fault line running through the Cleveland organization right now. Not the quarterback competition, not the contract situation. The direct, unresolved tension between a coach and an owner who are looking at the same information and arriving at completely different conclusions about what it means. I think being fair to Haslam here is important, because the easy narrative is to paint him as an irrational owner, clinging to a mistake and refusing to acknowledge what everyone can see. But that version of events misses something real about the position he's actually in. The Watson contract isn't a number on a spreadsheet that you can just set aside when it becomes inconvenient. $230 million, fully guaranteed, one of the largest financial commitments in the history of professional football ownership. Every week that contract produces nothing, no wins, no progress, no visible sign that the decision that led to it was ultimately defensible, is a week that has to be explained and justified to everyone connected to this franchise. Haslam isn't advocating for Watson because he doesn't understand what's happening on the field. He's advocating for Watson because the weight of that financial reality creates pressure that coaches simply don't carry in the same way. He made a bet of historic proportions, and the human impulse, a completely understandable human impulse, is to find a way to make it pay off rather than formally close the book on it. I get it, I genuinely do. But understanding why the pressure exists doesn't mean it should shape the decision. And what makes Monken's position in all of this genuinely interesting to me, genuinely revealing about the kind of coach he's trying to be in Cleveland, is what he's apparently doing in response to that pressure. He's holding. Based on everything the reporting suggests, he's absorbing Haslam's push, he's processing it, he's not pretending it doesn't exist, and then he's maintaining his professional judgment anyway. He is not quietly adjusting his language to create a face-saving opening for Watson. He is not signaling behind the scenes that the competition might look different than it sounds publicly. He is apparently standing exactly where he stood when he made his evaluation, and he's standing there, even with the most powerful person in the building trying to move him. That matters enormously. I don't think we talk enough about the difference between coaches who actually run their programs and coaches who manage the relationship with their employer, because those are two different jobs. And in the NFL, where the financial and political weight of ownership is constant and enormous, the temptation to blur the line between them is real and persistent. A coach who caves the moment ownership expresses a strong preference isn't a head coach in any meaningful sense. He's an employee performing the appearance of authority while the actual authority remains elsewhere. A coach who takes real pressure from a real power source, considers it seriously, and then maintains his football judgment because that judgment is what he was hired to exercise. That's a head coach. That's a person actually doing the job. Whether Monken can sustain that posture through the full arc of the offseason, whether Haslam ultimately accepts the football judgment his coach has delivered or escalates his involvement in ways that fundamentally alter the dynamic, that's the storyline I'm watching most closely right now, because it determines not just who starts at quarterback in 2026, but what kind of organization the Cleveland Browns actually are. Let me step back for a moment and place this inside the history that surrounds it, because I think you have to know that history to fully feel the weight of this moment. The Cleveland Browns have spent the better part of 2 decades cycling through quarterback situations that generated real hope before collapsing in ways that produced another reset and another chapter in a narrative that has become genuinely painful to follow. I've watched this franchise bring in veterans who were supposed to stabilize things, draft young players who were supposed to be built around, extend record contracts to players who were supposed to be the answer, and the position has never stabilized. The Watson situation isn't just the latest chapter, it's the most expensive chapter, the one that consumed the most organizational capital and produced the least visible return. And now here, the franchise is staring at yet another inflection point, with the same fundamental question hanging over everything. Is the decision being made by the people who make it for football reasons, or is it being made because of the weight of everything that came before it? The Cleveland fan base has earned the right to have that question answered honestly. These are people who have watched cycle after cycle of manufactured confidence dissolve into familiar disappointment, who have sat through press conferences where coaching staffs expressed conviction about quarterbacks who subsequently proved that conviction was misplaced, who have continued to invest their loyalty and their emotional energy into a franchise that has repeatedly asked them to believe that this time is different. They deserve to have the people running this team make decisions based on clear-eyed football logic rather than the organizational fog that comes from an owner and a head coach pulling toward opposite outcomes. And that's what makes Shedeur Sanders feel different to me. Not as a guaranteed answer, because nobody with intellectual honesty can promise outcomes about an unproven professional quarterback, but as a direction, as an approach. If Monken gets the organizational backing to pursue this the way the reporting suggests he wants to, what the Browns would actually be doing is something they haven't consistently done with young quarterbacks: committing fully, building the entire offseason infrastructure around one player's development, giving him every first-team rep from day one so that by the time September arrives, he has genuine preparation under him rather than the fractured, half-measure introduction to professional football that his partial first season produced, designing the scheme around his specific skills, his processing speed, his arm angles and timing windows, so that what he's being asked to execute on Sundays is actually fitted to what he does well. That's how quarterbacks develop. Not in a committee, not in a managed competition where organizational politics are shaping the depth chart as much as football evaluation. In a committed, clear-eyed developmental structure, where the answer is already decided and the work is about maximizing the answer you have. Watson, for his part, apparently hasn't handled the direction things are heading with anything resembling quiet acceptance. From what's being reported, he's making his resistance known. And I want to be honest here. From a purely human perspective, I understand it. He still believes he's a starting quarterback. He still believes that if given the opportunity, he can play at a level that justifies the position. That competitive refusal to accept diminishment is, in isolation, the kind of mentality you'd respect in an athlete. But we're not in isolation. We're in the full, specific, documented reality of what his tenure in Cleveland has actually produced, what the injury history has created, what the medical evaluation inside the building is apparently reflecting, what the trade market, which produced 0 interested teams despite active efforts to move him, communicated about how the rest of the league views his situation. Resistance doesn't alter any of those facts. It doesn't accelerate the physical recovery timeline. It doesn't change what the coaching staff believes about his durability. And it doesn't improve the dynamic inside a locker room that already has more complexity than any locker room needs heading into a critical season. Here is where I land on all of this, and I want to be direct about it. Monken is right, not just in the narrow tactical sense of making a sound roster decision, right in the deeper, more consequential sense that actually matters for the long-term direction of this franchise. Because the most persistent and most destructive force in the Cleveland Browns quarterback decision-making over the years hasn't been bad scouting or bad luck, though there's been plenty of both. It's been sunk cost reasoning, the organizational compulsion to justify previous decisions by continuing to invest in them, even when the honest football evaluation says the investment is no longer productive. The Watson contract is, by any measure, the largest sunk cost in franchise history. And the pressure Haslam is applying on Monken is, at its core, the pressure of sunk cost reasoning. The desire to extract enough performance from the commitment to make it feel less catastrophic. I understand the psychology of that completely, but the psychology of it doesn't make it sound. The money doesn't come back. It's gone regardless of how many games Watson starts or doesn't start. The only question that produces a useful answer is what gives this franchise the best path forward from where it actually stands right now. And when you ask that question without the weight of the contract distorting the answer, the conclusion isn't complicated. What I'm watching for in the coming weeks is whether Monken's position position holds. Whether Haslam ultimately accepts the judgment his head coach has delivered, or whether the ownership pressure produces enough movement to push the situation back into the deliberate ambiguity that's characterized the Browns' public posture for most of this offseason. Because those two paths produce fundamentally different versions of what the 2026 season looks like, and more importantly, fundamentally different pictures of what this organization is actually capable of becoming. If Monken holds and the organizational structure gets genuinely, fully built around Shedeur's development, not nominally, not with one eye still watching Watson's progress and keeping optionality alive, then the Browns enter this season with something they haven't consistently had at the quarterback position in a very long time: a clear answer and the infrastructure to develop it. The reps go to one player from day one. The scheme gets designed around one player's specific capabilities. The coaching attention, the personnel grouping decisions, the situational preparation all points in one direction. And when September arrives, that player has a real foundation under him, rather than the fractured starting point his first season produced. If Haslam's pressure wins and the situation drifts back into managed ambiguity, Watson getting meaningful first-team reps to protect the ownership relationship, the competition remaining artificially open to avoid a direct internal confrontation, Shedeur nominally the front-runner but organizationally sharing resources with a quarterback whose situation should already be resolved, then what you get is the worst version of all possible outcomes. Shedeur's development gets fragmented. Watson's uncertainty drags on without resolution. The locker room reads the mixed signals and draws the obvious conclusion about whether the people in charge actually know what they're doing. And another Cleveland offseason produces another version of the muddled, neither here nor there quarterback situation that has haunted this franchise for so long. The football evidence points clearly in one direction. Monken knows it. Most of the people inside that building, based on what's leaking out of it, know it too. Now the question is whether the organizational structure allows the football evidence to be the thing that actually decides it.